I probably try to define a niche in wine. I mean, the world of wine is so large. I think it's almost better if you can carve out kind of a specialty, um, and then, dive into it again.
I'm your host, Brian McCann, and this is the Road to Wine Expert podcast. Randy Smith is today's guest on the podcast. You may know him from his amazing wine blog, thewineright.com, better known as The Wine Right, across all social media. Randy is just a great guy, simply put, and he focuses his blog on winemakers and wineries and people in the industry that are all based in the Central Coast. And this is one of those things I've talked about with Chappie and I talk about with Randy, and it's just this notion of finding your niche in the wine industry. It's so big and it's so vast, and if you're going to get heard, it's really important that you pick a topic and then a subtopic, and probably some area underneath that, and really chase it down. And I mean, Randy presents this wonderful, colorful world that is Central Coast wine through his blog. And I encourage you to check it out. If you've been there before or if you're thinking about going there, it's really a who's who of just people and places in that region. Before we get started with Randy's interview, I just want to say we are on the cusp of getting to my goal from a few episodes back of 1,000 downloads for season 1. So the best way to find out when the contest goes live is to follow us on Instagram. That's Road to Wine Expert. And then go to our website and sign up to receive the emails. That way you'll be sure you don't miss out on any of the exciting news. And if you're new to this podcast, here's the deal. When we hit 1,000 downloads, I'm giving away $1,000 worth of wine, books, and resources that helped me on my own road to wine expertise, and that were written by many of the people featured in season 1 of this podcast. So if you're interested, be sure to follow along on social media and emails, and I will post complete contest details very soon. All right, let's kick it over to Randy.
Actually, I started late. My wife was into wine before I was. She coaxed me into taking a sort of a college class with her, with the local college, and they had a wine instructor there. And so I did that. Unfortunately, my work took me out of some of those classes. I missed 2 or 3 of the classes, but that kind of kindled an interest. But I didn't really have a transformative epiphany type wine that I drank that caused me to have a lot of interest in wine. But I did have sort of a epiphany wine visit that kind of kicked off where I'm going with the blog. And this was probably 7 or 8 years ago. We had made a trip to Oregon, and we had landed in Portland, and we're going to do a quick trip through the Willamette Valley and then go to Seattle for vacation. It was myself and another couple, my wife and another couple. But anyway, we had visited a winery called Napa in Carlton, Oregon, did a quick visit through the tasting room. The next year, we came back, and before the New Orleans Wine and Food Experience, there was a wine dinner featuring the wines of Napa, and the national marketing director was present at the dinner. And we introduced ourselves and told her that we were planning another visit back to Oregon that coming summer. So she took all our information and really set up like a private vineyard tour and a tour of the cellar and barrel tastings and the whole 9 yards. And I was like, wow, that's a lot better than a tasting room. So that kind of clued me into where, if I made a little effort and contacted people, you could really create some nice, intimate wine experiences.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense. That's a really cool experience. So it was that particular experience that sort of spawned your idea for the Wine Right then?
Well, it created a lot of interest in like planning another wine vacation and that type of thing. I like to write, but really my wife again sort of pushed me into doing the blog. At the time that I started, or right before I started, I didn't know what a blog was. So she sort of pushed me. I had a niece who had a blog, not about wine, but about, general stuff, and kind of talked to her a little bit about how she went about doing it. And then after some, delay, I finally got started about 5 years ago.
That's great. And so you've been writing for 5 years now. Do you have any like personal favorite pieces that you've done on the blog that maybe are some deeper cuts, maybe people who are sort of in my boat, or just getting into wine, just discovering blogs like yours?
Yeah.
What should we be reading on your site?
Yeah, I think one of the things that really kicked me off, I did an interview with Jordan Fiorentini of Epic Estate Wines in Paso Robles. And it's one of those things I didn't really know at that point if she would agree to do the interview. So it was kind of a push type thing, but she was very gracious. And we did a long, detailed question and answer thing that I think went over pretty well. And I kind of got some impetus from that to start doing more interviews. And, there was some reluctance or shyness or whatever you want to call it about contacting people. But I found that most vintners or winemakers really want to tell their story. And if you reach out to them, they're more than happy usually to do so.
Yeah, I think if you show excitement and general enthusiasm, people are more than willing to open their doors and share their experience, what they're doing with wine or what they're doing in wine, whether it be marketing or blogging or, podcasting. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So Wine Right, you said 5 years About
5 years. Yeah.
Yes.
I started initially with a few pieces that I had kind of toyed around with doing, and I knocked those out fairly quickly, and then ran out of subject matter. And then I really had to sit down and figure out what exactly I was going to do with it. And I decided to do a weekly blog. So I post on Monday mornings and, run the gamut from interviews to book reviews to wine reviews to whatever.
Yeah. So what's been the biggest difficulty you've faced in the 5 years? What's been the most challenging aspect of your blog?
I guess initially maybe subject matter, or trying to figure out exactly where I was going with it. But since I got started with that, it really hasn't been. You run into some dry spells where you're like, am I ever going to think of something else to write? But then when you do, or at least for me, when I do get started, I'm able to crank out 3 or 4 at a time just from, being inspired by one thing or another. So there really hadn't been, knock on wood, any real difficulties in the last 3 or 4 years anyway.
Yeah, that's great. It's great to hear. I think, you're probably at the point where you're so disciplined now, like you said, is you just start putting pen to paper or, typing in a word processor. It just probably starts flowing out pretty easily. What advice do you, go ahead. Sorry.
No, well, one thing that helps me too is we're still going on 2 or 3 wine trips a year, and that always generates material.
Yeah, it's important to get out of isolation, connect with people, especially physically going to the place. I know it's not possible for everyone, but if you can make a trip to really anyone who's in winemaking region, that really it also changes your perception. It's one thing to, read about Napa or
Right.
Paso, but then to go to see it, to understand the landscape, the people, it starts making a lot more sense.
Yeah, that's one of the neat things for me is to, if I'm having a glass of wine and I've actually been to the vineyard, I've kicked the dirt, it just means something more to me.
Yeah, we recently took a trip out to Napa in February.
Mm-hmm.
We were in Matthias, and I was with family, and my future father-in-law asked, where does this wine come from? And Jill just was like, oh, right back here, and it's a few feet away, and it
Right.
just feels more real.
Right.
It's suddenly not just, a product of consumption. It's, sort of transforms into art and story and
Right.
like all those other things we love about wine.
Right. Exactly.
So staying on this, writing idea and building your audience and sort of your voice, what advice do you have to people who are starting wine blogs, considering wine blogs? What would you say to them?
Well, dive in for one thing. I mean, I sort of dilly-dallied with the whole concept for several months before I started. So, dive in. And the other thing is, I mean, find something that really interests you. I mean, you don't have to be the world's greatest expert on wine. I don't consider myself an expert on wine. But if you write about things you're passionate about, it comes through in the stories and whatnot.
I think that's one of the great things about wine is that there's so many different facets. You can be someone who loves history, or someone who loves geology, someone who loves winemaking, someone who loves chemistry.
Right.
And I think the most important thing is like finding your voice, and then also your niche, right? Like, what is it you're writing about in wine? Because anyone can write wine reviews or things like that. But can you talk a bit about finding your voice? Like, how did you discover, who you are as a writer?
Yeah, I guess going way back, I mean, I had a high school teacher that was very instrumental in pushing me a little bit to write. So, I mean, it goes way back to that. So I had confidence in writing in general, but as to the wine subject matter, that took a while. I mean, I just had to get out there and try different things. So early on in the blog, I might do a piece about a visit that we made, or I even did a few wine reviews, like multiple bottles of, one thing or another. I just found that I was more interested in talking to principals of wineries and winemakers. So I do more of that now than probably anything else, just because I like it. And I sort of write for what I'm interested in, and I hope other people like it too.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, right, scratch your own itch.
Yeah,
exactly. Do what you're passionate about,
right.
and that shines through. I think it's clear. People who read your blog can see that you're excited, especially when you take. Some of your trip posts are are really great.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. You get a sense of a place, which and now you recently, I like the post you just did where you're like, you're going to let the photos do the talking, which is great too, to see, behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Because a lot of us don't have access, right? Especially when we're first starting out, maybe in wine.
Yeah.
And we're afraid to make a connection. So it's cool to see the behind the scenes, how everything's being made.
What was funny about that trip was I reluctantly got on Instagram way late. I mean, I was on Twitter and all these other vehicles to try to get the blog out there. But I sort of got pushed into Instagram, and I found on this trip that there are just a lot of winery people on Instagram. It's quick, you can post a photo, make a little comment, and you're done. So that on some of the visits that we made on the Central Coast, there were people that I follow and they follow me on Instagram, winery people that were like, hey, you finally made it to me, which is pretty cool, you know. So that was interesting in that, you know, Instagram was more influential, I guess, than I considered it to be before this trip, but it's really something that people want.
Yeah, I'm sort of fascinated by it because there is a vibrant community on Instagram who's interested in wine. But wine is so difficult to photograph. You know, the actual bottle or glass, those
Right.
tend to be boring pictures. I mean,
Yeah.
unless they're in a beautiful setting, you know, with
Right.
the vineyard in the background, they're sort of
Right.
uninspiring. But those shots of the vineyards or
Yeah.
winemaking,
Oh,
or, you
yeah.
know, seeing someone punch the cap, that's what really drives that. Or, you know, where are you? That's so beautiful in the world.
Right. Right. And, you know, I'm guilty of doing the bottle shots as well. And I've had people tell me that, you know, I tried that one because I saw you took a picture of it or
Yeah.
whatever, which, you know, that's cool. I'm just trying to stay connected because you know, I'm in South Louisiana. There are no vineyards nearby to go take pictures of. So I have to, when I'm not traveling, stay connected by doing some bottle shots and different things like that.
Yeah. And it's funny too, because there is another side of it, right? Where you're reviewing, you're sharing, and that's a great part of it too. And then there's like almost like a bottle envy club, you know, where people are taking pictures of, you know, these rare wines, like, oh, look what I'm drinking.
Right.
You know, and I mean, that's sort of any social media, right? It's a little bit of that vanity play.
Right. Yeah. I try to stay away from that, but I'm also cognizant of, you know, some of the people that follow me may be the people that made that wine, you know. So there's some of that too.
Yeah, there's always a little bit of politics in wine. Yet another fascinating part of the industry.
Right, exactly.
So you said it was your wife who pushed you into doing the blog. Is there anything, is there any advice you would have given yourself prior to that push?
You know, I wish I had gotten started earlier. This is the only advice. And that not only for the blog, I was way up in life before I really got started. And you know, all that time was wasted. So that's the only advice really. And you know, I'm on Blogger. I wish I had started on WordPress in the beginning, but I didn't. And now I'm, you know, considering the move over, but I haven't done that either.
That's a daunting task.
Yeah, exactly. Which is why I've procrastinated.
Yeah, as someone who's used to be in the website technology side of marketing, I know all about website transitions, and that's a fickle beast.
Yeah. It scares me.
So other than Blogger, what other tools do you use to create the Wine Right?
That's about it. You
Nice.
know? Yeah.
That's easy, clean.
Yeah. You know,
Well,
from that point.
Well, then, yeah, the other nice thing about Blogger or platform, really anything, is just, you know, there's really no startup costs. It's not like you had to go build a website, buy a domain, do all that stuff. I mean, doing it through Blogger is pretty low risk. So for anyone starting out, that's probably the way to go, just to see if you like doing it. I think it was, I forget who I was listening to, but their suggestion was about starting a blog was write 5 posts, go ahead and post 5 times.
Okay.
And if you like that, then maybe blogging's for you. But if you can't even make it to 5 posts, they're like, you know what, you try something else, because if you can't write 5 things, you're not going to be able to produce you know, the amount of content you need to make something really substantial.
Yeah, that makes sense. And, you know, that's kind of what happened to me. I mean, I think I quickly, you know, cranked out 5 or 6 and then, okay, like, all right, what's next? And, you know, a lot of those were based on trips we'd made, and I didn't have a trip coming back, you know, planned anytime soon. So it took a while to get. Once I got into the groove, though, of doing it every week, it's not really an issue.
Yeah. So if someone wanted to do exactly what you do, let's say, and be, the Wine-Right 2.0, what path would you recommend they take?
I probably try to define a niche in wine. I mean, the world of wine is so large. I think almost better if you can carve out kind of a specialty, and then dive into it again. I mean, if it's going to be, if you're going to focus on travel, get out there and visit. If it's interviews you like doing, do that. Start making phone calls, emails, whatever, and get out there and start doing it, really.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think there's so many, listen, we're never going to be wine experts, right? That's sort of the discussion at the heart of this summit, but you can probably become an expert in an area, in a certain aspect of the industry. Maybe you're, the lady who writes about wine soil, you're the gentleman who writes about, a particular area of the country, or maybe even like one vineyard and its history. I mean, to me, that would be so fascinating if someone really dug in deep and, like I love all the Zinfandels from Monte Rosso. So like a history of that vineyard, and maybe all like do the great vintages, cover all the different, wines that have gone through there. That would be a really, the ownership, the back and forth, who's owned it. That would be a really cool piece. Now that I say that, maybe I'll go write it. But, those like really nitty gritty stuff, I think that's my biggest issue right now with people writing about wine, is that, everyone's sort of playing at like a surface level. And there's few people who are willing to dig deep in that one area. And that's the people I would follow, like yourself, like you decided to do interviews and, sort of wine tourism, if you will, and that's a cool play. So I don't think someone should try and do exactly what you do. It was probably a poorly phrased question in the first place, but pick your niche is great advice.
Yeah. I had gone to one of the blogger conferences 3 or 4 years ago. And that was one of the points, they had different speakers and that type of thing. And some of that I really didn't find that useful, but in discussions with other participants there, the people that were really focused on a niche, there was a guy I remember that was only wrote about Syrah. So that was his thing. And man, he was, digging deep, but I thought that was cool. I went back after the fact and read his blog and liked it.
Yeah.
But, every week there was something new, and it may be an interview, or it may be, in-depth report about a vineyard or a particular wine, but it was interesting, and you could tell that he was passionate about it. And I think that's the key.
Yeah. Speaking of Syrah and grape varietals and all things wine, do you have a particular favorite type of wine or place for wine or any personal connections?
I think now, and again, it's between my wife and I, because, if we're opening a bottle, she's helping drink it. It's the Central Coast of Southern California probably is our niche right now. I mean, Grenache, Syrah, and the red blends there. And you can find some Pinot, especially in Santa Barbara County, that is really good. But, the people there are also very accommodating, very gracious. And for somebody like me, they've kind of gone out of their way to give me their time, which I'm very, very appreciative of. So, but the wines are excellent as well. So,
yeah, a cool region. One, I'm new to this whole thing, so when I started learning about it, I think I listened to, I think it was a Wine for Normal People podcast on the Central Coast. And that it was a great primer, something that got me excited about the region. And like you said, there's a ton of different varietals, a ton of different styles. And it's a huge, if you're just talking about Central Coast, a huge region. So a lot of different expressions, but that ocean influence, the mountain influence, the big diurnal shift, you can get some really, really cool wines from that region.
Yeah. That's part of the whole deal. I mean, the geography there is so unique. And, when I've talked to different winemakers there, all that makes a difference in the wines that they're making. So that's cool to me. You can kind of actually see, what's impacting the taste of the wine.
Yeah. So it's, Randy live from the Central Coast via southern Louisiana, right?
Right.
Well, I mean, that's a nice thing though with wine, right? It's that travel experience in a bottle that you can escape. And then when you do go there, it is acting like a time capsule, right? You can sort of go back to, remember we had this wine at either this restaurant or at this vineyard.
Right.
Really, really special. Yeah. So, other than wine from the Central Coast, any other wines or beer, spirits, anything you're enjoying these days?
We've all, I've got a lot of Oregon wine stockpiled and Washington wine stockpiled, Pinots and, various things that we enjoy. And then Napa, some Napa cabs and Sonoma Zinfandel. So we try to kind of, branch out. We're not totally focused on the Central Coast, but we've made a lot of friends up there as well. So right now we're kind of thinking about a New York visit. So I may have to track down some New York State wines to get us in the mood for that.
Some research,
yes. Work.
Yeah, that's the fun part of the job. I know I always say, working in wine retail, it's the only place I've ever wanted to take work home with me.
Exactly.
There a last great glass or bottle of wine you've had that sticks out in recent memory?
I was looking at Cellar Tracker. I post notes on there to keep track of the bottles and whatnot. And my highest rated wine so far this year was a Denner Ditch Digger, which is mostly Grenache from Paso Robles.
Great.
2013. We took it to a restaurant and decanted it there and enjoyed it with a nice meal. So that was my most memorable one in 2017.
Great. Before we call it for the day, what's the best way people can find you on the internet, connect with you?
Yeah, that's great. Well, the website, www.thewineright.com. You'll get the blog there. I'm on Twitter at The Wine Right and Instagram at The Wine Right. And I think, like we were saying earlier, I seem to get more action these days on Instagram than anything else, which is cool.
Yeah. Well, Twitter's busy.
Yeah.
Right. You got a lot of action on it right now.
Yeah. But I still post out things on Twitter and whatnot, but yeah, there is a lot of competition from various people.
For sure. Yeah. Well, Randy, thank you so much for taking some time to sit down and, like I said, sit on the other side of the microphone.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate it. It was less painful than I thought.
Thanks for listening to my interview with Randy Smith, aka The Wine Right. Be sure to follow his blog at thewineright.com and The Wine Right on Instagram, where he's getting most of the action these days. One of my favorite things about Randy's Instagram versus his blog is that on Instagram you get to see what he's drinking, and he's usually celebrating wines of Central Coast. And on his blog, you can find features and profiles of a lot of things he does drink and some stuff that maybe he hasn't quite pulled out of his cellar yet. Be sure to follow along with the Road to Wine Expert on Instagram while you're at it, and you can go to theroadtowineexpert.com to get links to all things Randy Smith. Also, while you're there, go to roadtowineexpert.com/music to learn about the musicians whose music is featured in our podcast and make it free thanks to the Creative Commons licensing. Last but not least, my one request is that you share this episode with someone you know who will love it. By spreading the word that is the Road to Wine Expert, we get to keep this podcast going and keep it free for everyone, forever. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.